I mean, the grand jury, they summoned me in to testify. You know, they brought up the charges and sent them to the district attorney, Ronnie Earl, but he dismissed the charges, talking about there was insufficient evidence, even though they had a tape.
I would have fired him if I'd have been the chief. But you got to remember, you got civil service to deal with, and you got Austin Police Association to deal with, which is very strong. But it's going to take a strong police chief to deal with that problem.
The routine nature with which they put bad cops back on the force now, and the complete futility of police management to discipline officers significantly in any way until it's become essentially a joke, to where officers actually themselves, it's part of the departmental culture that they simply don't believe that they will be significantly disciplined, and they can essentially do what they want to.
There's a heavy presumption here in favor of the police. You know, there's a heavy presumption with the juries and with the judges and everybody else that the police are right. And so how many people has this officer convicted on perjured testimony?
Every police agency I've ever had any acquaintance with, all of them have similar problems. And at the fundamental root is this question of accountability and how officers and supervisors and chiefs of police themselves are held accountable for the actions, their own actions and the actions of the department.
There's a parallel between lying and brutality. It reflects on the integrity of that person, and it's a person who shouldn't be a police officer. And then the question to the police chief is, why is he a police officer?
You know, when I look at New Orleans, and when I look at some of the other party cities, so to speak, and I look at how people do the wildest things that people on 6th Street would never consider doing, but somehow you never have, or almost never have incidents.
We're really talking about a small number of people. The vast majority of officers are not having repeat problems with excessive force. But for the tiny handful that do, they're allowed to remain on the force when really under any police best practices standards they should be removed from the force. So when they are allowed to stay there, it creates a culture on the force of tolerating that type of behavior.
You almost have an unholy trinity here. The police department is locked into its own culture, and that culture involves you know, being cowboys on the east side. The Austin Police Association is going to instinctively always defend the police officer, no matter how outrageous and atrocious the officer's behavior has been. And the police chief usually ends up on a tightrope between the department and the union and the city administration, in a sense, but more because of lack of skillful leadership than anything else. So all of that, I think, those three things play together very badly.
The Austin Police Association has a role, and most certainly they need to be a voice to protect officers' rights, but they go too far in their efforts to protect the worst of the worst officers, the bad apples who are bringing down the whole system by their behavior. I think the APD should be more selective about who they go to bat for.
They give money to campaigns. They've got very good and effective lawyers that handle their cases, and everybody wants to support police, including me. But I do think that when there's a close case, you give the call to the police officer. But in some cases, not just close cases. And I think the police department had a responsibility to try to get rid of those individuals who are going to wreak havoc.
There are people who should be terminated, and they're not. They're given days off.
If the chief wants to discipline the officer, ultimately a mediator will get to be the final say-so. And almost always the police chief's decisions to terminate officers are overturned. Usually when he tries to fire an officer, the police union fights him to the bitter end. It goes to binding arbitration. The arbitrator overturns the chief's decision and the bad cop's back on the force. And this has happened so many times that it is just a routine. It's simply how it works.
It seems to me, though, that the message that that sends to the community is that if you are a non-police officer and you lie, you're going to get punished and you're going to be prosecuted. If you're a police officer and you lie, then you're going to get off the hook. I mean, it sets up this dichotomy, this two-tiered system of justice in our community. I think it's very bad. I think when a cop lies above all else, that either that cop has to be fired or has to be prosecuted.
As far as adequate punishment, the city of San Antonio has what I think is the gold standard policy, and that is that if you're caught lying on the job, you're terminated. When it goes to the arbitrator, the rule says if you lie, you can be punished anywhere from 3 days suspension to termination. Then the arbitrator might look at extenuating circumstances and adjust the decision, because there's a range that they are allowed to allot a punishment within. But if you have a disciplinary matrix that says here are the circumstances under which an officer will be fired, then when that circumstance occurs, you can simply fire them.
You know, all we want to see is just all the bad cops off the street, which it may never happen, you know, but I mean, you're dividing the community, period. Ain't no African American or Hispanic or basically any race safe on the streets with APD in the situation that we in right now, in the predicament that they putting us in.
Very few citizens are going to have a police officer now. They're glad to see something happen to one, because it's the way the police officers treat the community.
In 2009, the meet and confer agreement comes up for renewal, and at that time there will be an opportunity to alter that agreement. And the city could, and I believe should, insist that they install a uniform disciplinary matrix, at least for the most serious offenses, and state under no uncertain terms under what circumstances you're going to fire an officer. And for the most serious instance, like lying or corruption, I think you need to say termination is the only option.
You hit a person in the pocketbook, you may not change his heart, but you can change their minds. You start giving them some time off, you start taking jobs away from them, and you can change that.
Individual rights to liberty needs to be protected, and that the police, as public servants, should and can be limited and to the extent to which they can interfere with the rights of any citizen. Litigation is a tool to correct something that's already happened. Legislation is a tool to prevent it from happening in the first place by changing policies or enhancing policies, expanding rights to protect rights.
If anybody have any problems, I feel like they shouldn't just sweep it up under the rug. I feel like they ought to just take the proper steps to rectify the situation. If you felt like you was harassed or talked to the wrong way or anything like that, I mean, just take the initiative to make change, and change will come.